Are you dreaming for a 5? Well, this is how you're going to turn your dream into reality.
Hi, Mr. Simmons. I'm Olivia.
I'm Emma.
I'm Christina, and welcome to another Crash Course video.
Today we will be covering
Essays! Not only are we going to go over all of the FRQs, which include SAQ, LEQ, and DBQ, but we're also going to be covering some helpful hints and the guidelines regarding each essay.
Alright, to start off with the SAQ, you'll be required to answer 3 different sets of questions. When answering the question, the first thing you want to do is answer the prompt directly. This answer should be specific and right to the point, so you want to be very clear on what your answer is. The following sentences would be the evidence that proves your answer is correct, so you always want to make sure it is relevant to the topic. The last sentences are going to wrap up your answer and analyze why the evidence relates to the topic. Okay, so most people lose points because they have factual and true evidence, but it doesn't relate to the topic, so all you're doing is wasting your time. So the third point to answering an SAQ is the reasoning. The reasoning is explaining the evidence and how it relates to the prompt. So overall, when you're answering an SAQ, you want to make sure that you're first answering the prompt, second, giving evidence that relates to the prompt, and 3, that you're providing reasonings and explanations for why it all ties together.
Right off the bat, DBQ makes up a big chunk of your AP exam score, so you want to make sure you're fully equipped and ready for that, just because if you don't have a good DBQ score, but your other parts of your test are good, you may still not end up with the passing grade or like the type of grade you'd want. And so basically with the DBQ, you'll be given 7 different sources or prompts or like photos, and you have to use at least 6 of them in your essay. The first point that can be earned is a thesis point, and it's really similar to an LEQ thesis point because you need to answer the prompt, and it has to be precise, because if it's kind of off topic or vague, they tend to not give you the point, especially because on the rubric there's a section where they can like check that it's not precise or vague, so they're definitely thinking about that when grading it. And then you can earn a context point just like the LEQ rubric 2. The context point is where you talk about a historical event that relates to your topic, so you want to make sure that it's somewhat relevant or else it will seem out of place and kind of off topic. This point can be considered an easy point because even if you don't necessarily know about your prompt or about the sources they gave you, if you know kind of what happened during that time period, you can tend to find something that relates. And so as long as it relates to the prompt or what you're actually talking about, you should be able to get this point. It's one that I feel like is frequently given rather than missed. So moving on, you're given the 7 documents, and so you get a point for using at least 3 of the 6, and then you get another point if you use 3 more, so technically 6 out of 6. However, I think that it's best to use all 7 if you can with the time that you're given, because there's a lot of times where you may interpret one wrong, and they don't just give you these points if you summarize the documents in your essay. You need to really make sure that you read the documents and understand what they're saying so you can relate what they're saying to your argument and your prompt to like back up what you're trying to say. And so if you just summarize it, then they're not going to give you the point because clearly you don't truly know anything or understand the topic. You're just taking what's on one paper and transferring it to another. So going along with how you need to know certain things to be able to get these document points, you can't just kind of know nothing and just summarize. There is an outside evidence points where you need at least 1 or 2 pieces of outside evidence that relates back to your argument that was just probably not mentioned in any of the documents they gave you. Knowing about all the little events that happen and that we learn about in class is really important for this because you can tend to just bring 1 or 2 of those in, and then that's your outside evidence points right there because it shows that you understand what those events are and what the event you're talking about is and how they relate. When it comes to analysis and reasoning, there's 2 different points you can get. One is just demonstrating that you understand basically what you're writing about and understand what your prompt is and how you're supposed to answer that. And then one is HIP, which HIP stands for historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. And so basically you need to HIP at least 3 of the 6 or 7 documents that you choose to use, and you need to do it correctly in order to get this point. So if there is a letter to Congress or something like that in your DBQ, the sheets that they give you, you might say that the intended audience is Congress in order to blah, 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 blah. And that's like a really easy example that you could be given. They tend to be a lot more complex than that. But you just have to either show historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view when writing about 3 of the documents in order to get that point. That point can be really, really challenging. So it's best, or how I like to do it, is I like to read all the documents and then kind of go back really fast and see which ones would be technically easy to hit, because a lot of times you can waste time on explaining the hit part and you might still not get the point. You also get 15 minutes of reading time, and for me, reading the documents take 5 to 7 minutes, and so it's good to just sit and take a few minutes to figure out what you're going to hit. So that way when you're writing it later on or 20 minutes later, you know exactly what you're going to say. And you're also very tired at this point, so it helps yourself out in the end. The last point is a very challenging point, because if you don't know what you're talking about and aren't able to answer the prompt you were given well or accurately, you tend to don't get it. So I'm just going to read from the rubric what it is so you guys get an idea.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Demonstrates a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the prompt. So basically, this is really where you have to read the prompt they give you, and if it says certain vocabulary or different terms in it, you need to be able to answer that. So for instance, I have an example prompt to show you guys. So if the prompt was evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. So this is evaluate the extent of change. So this means that you need to show what didn't change and what did change, or how much change or how little changed, in order to get the point. So if your argument doesn't really focus on that or highlight how much or how little changed and what those things were, you're not going to get the point, because you're not really understanding or evaluating what they were really asking. So an example of a thesis that you would answer this prompt with, a to what extent prompt, would be from 1763 to 1783, colonial ideals. From 1763 to 1783, colonial ideas about American independence changed from just questioning British policies to calling for revolution. So this is a kind of highlighting the whole idea about British policies and revolution. So in some of the documents, I'm sure that about half or a third focus on that, and a half or a third focus on the other part, which is the revolution. So that's just an example, and kind of gives you guys an insight into how to write a DBQ. Some helpful tips I would say when writing a DBQ is that you're given an hour and 30 minutes to write the LEQ and DBQ. However, LEQs you can tend to write a lot faster than the 40 minutes they recommend, and it's a lot smaller of the portion of the test. So I recommend spending more time on DBQ, because it can take longer too at some points, and then leaving yourself less time for an LEQ, because it's a lot easier to gain points in a shorter amount of time on an LEQ. And lastly, I would just recommend making sure you fully understand the documents before you start analyzing them in your essay, because there's a lot of times where there'll be one sentence in a document that completely changes the meaning, and if you miss that and skip over it when you're reading it, it can throw off your whole argument, which can be difficult, because if you only do 6 of the documents, you're not going to get that point, because you're only going to have 5 of them accurately used. So yeah, I hope you guys can write a DBQ now.
So today I'll be covering the LEQ. So they recommend 40 minutes for the essay, although it's very common that students will take more time on the DBQ and then leave 20 to 30 minutes for the LEQ. And so I definitely recommend doing that. I did that on my final. And then as far as for the College Board rubric, you're going to want to start your essay off with a feasible argument and thesis. Your thesis should include a defensible claim, and your body paragraphs should have supporting arguments that support your thesis as well. The second point to earn on the scoring guideline is context, and some people prefer to put it at the beginning before their thesis, but I personally like to put it after my thesis, just because I get my thesis down and then I can kind of refer to my thesis when I'm writing my context. And context, you basically want to use the same timeline regarding the prompt, but you want to drag in broader historical events and developments and stuff during that time period. After context, you're going to want to set up your body paragraphs, and your body paragraphs, I would literally take what you wrote in your thesis and paste your argument into each body paragraph, if that makes sense. So for say if one of your arguments was like, the British did this because they're dumb, then you're gonna put that line in your first paragraph and say, I think the British did this because they're dumb, on your first body paragraph. So in your body paragraphs, this is where you'll earn the 3rd point on the scoring rubric, and that's for evidence. So to support your argument, you're going to want to use outside evidence of that historical time period that supports the claim that you're trying to make in that body paragraph. And so this, you only need 1 to 2 pieces of evidence, so it's pretty easy to get that point. My advice to get this point is to really study up on key important events that happened during each period of like the APUSH list, and just get familiar with those so you'll always have a steady list of events in your head that you can use to support really many wide varieties of claims in different time periods. On a real note, the last point on the LEQ rubric really cannot be earned if you're not equipped with the right knowledge to know the topic and stuff, so that point I rarely get, honestly. Everything has to be really collaborative and make sense in the end. One important thing to do when you're writing your essay overall is to make sure you're answering what the prompt is asking for. So if the prompt is asking for a cause and effect or a similarity and difference, you want to make sure that you're answering it with the same knowledge of that. Okay, to give you an idea of what a prompt might look like, this is one of the College Board examples. It says, evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War marked a turning point in American relations with Great Britain. So for a to what extent problem that Mr. Simmons really likes to use, you'll need to analyze what changed and what stayed the same for that time period before the war and the period after the war. And then this is where the historical thinking skills of periodization really comes into play in your essays. So yeah, that's Olivia Fleming for Crash Course. I hope you enjoyed Mr. Simmons.
Okay, thanks for watching this Crash Course. Don't forget to subscribe
Crash
and
Course.
dislike John Green because we're clearly more knowledgeable than him. And I hope you enjoyed. See you
Thumbs
later.
up, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and make sure to like this video, Mr. Simmons. Thank you. Bye.